In today's video, I will be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election according to the polling averages in every state. My methodology here will be very simple. I'll be looking at the 538 polling averages in every state and applying it onto this electoral map while simultaneously offering my own analysis. First off, in the national popular vote, Joe Biden is trailing Donald Trump by a margin of 1.1% according to 538's polling average. That may seem slim, but it is a steady lead that Trump has held since the polling aggregate's existence. Furthermore, Biden won the popular vote back in 2020 by 7 million votes, or 4.5 percentage points. And considering he won this election by a very slim number in terms of the total votes from the swing states, this is very good news for Donald Trump. However, the popular vote does not decide who becomes the president, and how would this popular vote result in the electoral college map? In today's video, we will find out. Without further ado, let's jump right into today's video. Now, the first state here is the state of Alabama, a deep southern state that voted for Donald Trump by 25%. Trump is leading here by an average of about 22 to 23%, definitely sufficient for a safe margin. By the way, the margins are in the description down below. Now going to the next state here, the state of Alaska. Trump is maintaining a steady lead in the state of Alaska, ranging from anywhere between 7 and 23%. Trump won the state by about 10, and right now the polling average does suggest that Trump is up in the state by a safe margin, an improvement from 2020. Now going to the competitive state of Arizona, a state that Joe Biden won by 11,000 votes back in 2020, a state that was critical to Joe Biden's victory. Now, right now, Trump has a very substantial lead in the state of Arizona, 4.4%, and it's pretty much outside of the margin of error of about 4% according to these polling aggregates. Currently, Trump has consistently led in every single poll except you can see 2 here by the same polling company. So I do certainly believe that Trump is currently favored in the state of Arizona, perhaps not by 4.7%, but still by quite a substantial margin. Trump is favored according to these polls, probably because many moderate Republicans who decide to vote for Joe Biden out of the fear of Donald Trump see Joe Biden's job performance. They probably don't really favor Joe Biden anymore, and they're going to return back to Trump. And as a result here, Trump is enjoying a lead in the state of Arizona. Now going to the next state here, the state of Arkansas. What you do see is that Trump is consistently leading Joe Biden by about 28% in the state of Arkansas, an improvement from 2020, I believe. And now going to the next state here, the state of California, a big blue state here. Joe Biden is below 50% right now. He's at 49.5%. Trump is at 30%, and Kennedy is just over 10%. While this may seem like a pretty significant lead for Joe Biden, keep in mind that he won the state of California in 2020 by a margin of 30 percentage points. So this is certainly a reduction in support for Joe Biden and an uptick for Donald Trump by a slight margin. Right now, however, still the state of California safely in the Democratic column. Now going to the state of Colorado, a semi-competitive state, a state that was historically Republican before trending heavily towards the Democrats in the 21st century. Right now, Joe Biden consistently maintains a lead in the state of Colorado by varying different margins. However, Joe Biden does lead in Colorado, giving the state to Joe Biden by a likely margin. The next state here, which would be the state of Connecticut, unsurprisingly going to go for Joe Biden on this electoral college map. But again, the margins aren't the best. If you look at all of these polling averages here, that does give Joe Biden about a 12% advantage, which is just sufficient for a safe margin. Now we go to the next state here, the state of Delaware. In Biden's home state, there are no real polls because both of these are Kennedy versus Biden polls. For the sake of argument here, I'm still going to put this state in the safe blue column because we know it's going to go for Joe Biden. Next state here, or the District of Columbia rather, is obviously going to go for Joe Biden. There are no polling averages, but you're really just ignorant if you believe that Trump has any chance in the District of Columbia, a district that Joe Biden won with more than 90% of the vote, which means DC is going safe blue. Now going to the state of Florida, a state that Trump actually did quite well in back in 2020, despite losing the election. Trump won the state by nearly 400,000 votes, a very impressive margin, did very well in Miami-Dade County, the largest county in the state. closed the 30% deficit he had in 2016 to about 7% deficit, and Republicans did very well there in the state in 2022. It's no longer really a swing state. It's unsurprising that right now in 2024 in the state of Florida, in 2020, Joe Biden held a 2.5% lead, lost the state by more than 3%. Right now, Trump is leading by 8.8%, not as impressive as the 2022 performances by Republicans, but still a significant margin in the state of Florida, a state that was super competitive previously in past elections. Now going to the next state here, the state of Georgia. This is an ultra-competitive state, the closest state by percentage in the 2020 general election, a state that was decided by just over 11,000 votes, a very close margin. A state where Joe Biden did phenomenally in terms of the Atlanta suburbs. Trump did quite well in terms of running up the support in the rural areas, but he fell just short of winning the state and retaining it for a second consecutive election. Now, however, there are a lot of kind of moderate or slightly more conservative Republicans who held their nose and voted for Joe Biden. But again, just like Arizona's case, they're not very satisfied right now with Biden's job performance, and many of them have decided to revert back to Donald Trump, at least according to the polls. Trump enjoys a 5% lead in the state of Georgia, which is quite comparable to his 2016 performance in that state. Georgia, a state that voted for Joe Biden in 2020, is now likely red. Now going to the next state here, the state of Hawaii, Barack Obama's home state. This state, according to polling, is actually competitive. I don't buy that though. I do believe that Joe Biden will win the state of Hawaii right now by a safe margin, and the polling aggregate has it at about D plus 13 if you average the two polls. However, Joe Biden won this state by like 30 points, by even larger margin than California, so of course the state is still going to go for Joe Biden. Now going to Idaho here. Trump has no sign of slippage in the state. He still leads the state by about 30%, which is a safe margin. Now going to Illinois here, a state where it is trending more towards the Republican Party, but 2020 will not be the election. 2024 will not be an election in which the state goes red, as the state is still solidly in the Democratic column. The state is kind of narrowing. If you look at the polling averages, it's only about a 13% lead for Joe Biden, not the most impressive margin for a Democrat in Illinois. Now going to Indiana here. Currently, Trump has about a 20% advantage in the two polls head-to-head between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So Indiana is still in the safe Republican column. Right now, Joe Biden at 100 electoral votes to Donald Trump at 90 electoral college votes. Now going to the state of Iowa here. Iowa is historically a more competitive state, a state that voted for Obama twice, a state that generally actually had a liberal tilt, a state that Democrats generally won by about 1%. I believe Al Gore won the state. We look at many previous Democrats, they all won the state of Iowa. However, Donald Trump was able to carry the state by 9 points in 2016 and by comparable 8 points back in 2020. The state, especially this part of the state here, around Davenport, Scott County, and around Cedar Rapids. This part of the state, historically speaking, the rural areas in this part of the state bordering the state of Wisconsin and Illinois, historically very liberal, generally for a rural standard, and generally voted with Democrats. This was an election in which Trump swept all of the Iowa counties except 6, and generally the state has trended heavily towards the Republicans since 2016. It's long gone for the Democrats. Currently in the polling aggregate, Trump enjoys about a 12% lead, which is right now, according to the polling averages, about 11.75% advantage, which is just short of a safe margin. Now going to the state of Kansas here, unsurprisingly, Trump does hold about a 14% advantage in the state of Kansas, sufficient for a safe margin. Now, both candidates have crossed the 100 electoral vote threshold, but they're still very far from the presidency. In a short recap, the two most competitive states, Arizona and Georgia, both voting for Biden in 2020, have both flipped red on this electoral college map. Next, going to the state of Kentucky. In the state of Kentucky here, a solidly Republican state, a state in which Trump is leading by about 24% in the polling aggregate, which is sufficient for, again, a safe margin. In Louisiana, a similar performance here by Donald Trump. He's leading by about 14% in the polling aggregate. However, that is surprisingly weak considering the fact that Joe Biden lost the state to Donald Trump by about 19%. Nevertheless, here a safe margin for Donald Trump, nothing really to be taken out from a slight underperformance in the polling. Now in the state of Maine, a state that Joe Biden won by 9 points, which is considered in the future perhaps a more competitive state. Obama swept all of the counties in the state back in 2012 except this one county, and now the state is pretty much half red and half blue if you look at it geographically in terms of the number of counties that are voting blue and number of counties that are voting red. In fact, there looks like to be more red than blue. The Democratic city of Portland, however, is sufficient for Democrats to end up retaining the state for the past couple of elections. However, the state is trending more towards the Republican Party, and currently in the polling averages, Republicans actually seem to have a good shot of winning the state of Maine. The most recent poll had Trump up by 6, and then the poll before that had Joe Biden up by just 1. In 2022, the poll conducted by Emerson did have Biden up by 11. I believe these two polls are closer to the truth than this Trump plus 6 poll. However, if you just look at the recency of some of the polls here and just the averages, and you see that the 2nd district is consistently super Republican, I'm going to give the 2nd district as safe red, the 1st district as safe blue, and Maine's at large with a slight Democratic lean, though this is much more competitive than what about a decade ago any Democrat or Republican could anticipate Maine to be for a presidential election. Another good sign for Donald Trump. Now going to the state of Maryland here, we've had a lot of polling in Maryland in the Senate race. As a result, there's also a lot of polling in the presidential race. What we're seeing is that Joe Biden's still up by about 20, but that's not the most impressive margin considering Biden won the state by more than a 2-1 margin in 2020. Nevertheless, a safe state is a safe state for Joe Biden. He wins Maryland here by about 20%. That underperformance of about more than 10% actually can be attributed to a competitive Senate race on the same ballot. Nevertheless, the state of Maryland, with its safe blue DNA, is still going to go for Joe Biden nevertheless. Now going to the next state here, the state of Massachusetts, one of the 2 states that gave all of its counties to Joe Biden. The other state being the state of Rhode Island nearby. Again, this is a very, very blue state, a state in which Joe Biden is leading by about 23% on the polling aggregate. Not the best margin for a Democrat in Massachusetts, but again, he is going to end up winning that state, no doubt about that. Now going to the next state here, the state of Michigan, this is a highly competitive state. A state that voted for Joe Biden by 155,000 votes back in 2020, but a state that Donald Trump won in 2016. This was the state that gave Biden the largest margin of victory in terms of states that Biden flipped. However, Democrats have a fair share of worries. Joe Biden lost more than 100,000 votes in the Democratic primary to uncommitted, and there were about 150,000 protest votes against Biden in that Democratic primary. Again, Biden won the state by just over 150,000 votes. When you're losing that many Democratic primary voters, that is a concern, especially in areas like Dearborn, which is within Wayne County. There were state Senate districts that actually supported uncommitted, which is a bad sign for Joe Biden because his numbers, generally Democrats' numbers with Arab Americans are very high, but in this election they're closer to 50-50, with many Arab Americans unsatisfied with the Israel-Hamas war and Biden's handling of that issue. The polls seem to reflect that, with Trump up by just 0.4%. Again, the polls are very spread around. They're definitely pretty much all of them are within the margin of error. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are leading in every single poll by single digits. It's a very close race. I would not read much into this Trump plus 0.4% number. Trump was at his high point leading by more than 5%, but that was never going to happen. Trump was never going to win the state by more than 5%. This margin is still very competitive, but ultimately I would agree right now with the polling that Trump is narrowly favored to win the state of Michigan at this point in time, which does again put Trump above Joe Biden in terms of the Electoral College vote number. Now the next state here is the state of Minnesota, another state with a very high uncommitted percentage in the Democratic primaries, with almost 30% of the state voting against Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries by either voting uncommitted or for a lesser candidate, with Dean Phillips, a former congressman from the state, also receiving 7.8% of the Democratic primary vote. Again, there are a lot of protest votes from around Minneapolis. There were a lot of endorsements for uncommitted. Essentially, the state again, when the state is super competitive, these uncommitted voters really matter. However, the state's not going to be ultra close in terms of the Democratic result, considering Biden won the state by 230,000 votes and has a significantly lesser population compared to the state of Michigan. Nevertheless, here, the current polling does have this race as a dead heat, with Joe Biden up by just 2.4% against Trump, and Trump leading in 2 polls, though both of them are funded by McConnell and Associates, essentially a conservative-leaning poster. I'm going to put the state in the lean blue column either way. Now going to the next state here, the state of Mississippi, a state with the highest black population across the United States, but also a very uneducated state in terms of just the number of college graduates. The state right now is going to go for Trump according to polling aggregates by 18%. Democrats have a very high floor in the state, but never end up winning it, essentially. Now the next state here is the state of Missouri, a state that was decided by just 1,000 votes in the 2008 presidential election, a state that is now solidly in the Republican column. Trump is leading by an average of about 15%, similar to his 2020 performance, save for Donald Trump, putting Trump now at 150 electoral college votes to Joe Biden at 134. Next up, the state of Montana here. Unsurprisingly, Trump with a significant lead over Joe Biden. Montana safe red for Donald Trump. He leads by about 20% in that state. Now going to Nebraska. Although Nebraska itself is insignificant in terms of the political distribution of the state, consistently voting for Republicans, the 2nd district is crucial to Democrats' success in winning the 2020 presidential election, in terms of the fact that Democrats could have afforded to lose Pennsylvania and Georgia if they won Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. In 2024, the district also plays a important role in deciding the presidential election, where you could see several scenarios which the 2nd district decides who wins the presidential election. Anyways, right now, pretty much in Nebraska's 2nd district, we see a mix of polling. You see 2 polls in Nebraska's 2nd showing Trump with about a 3% lead, and then we see this most recent poll that has Joe Biden with a 5% lead that is sponsored by a Republican organization. When I factor all that in, I'm going to right now still give the district right now to a Joe Biden tilt margin, because the district did go for Joe Biden by 7 points back in 2020, but all the other districts remain safe in the Republican column, boosting Trump up to 158 electoral college votes to Joe Biden's 135 electoral college votes. But again, a lot of states still remain. The next state here, the state of Nevada. Nevada is a state where, again, Joe Biden was able to win in 2020, a state Hillary Clinton won in 2016, that is uniquely competitive. Joe Biden won the state by 34,000 votes, but the largest county, Clark County, pretty much gave Biden a 90,000 net vote advantage, and the rural areas are so sparsely populated that they weren't able to make up that difference for a Republican candidate. However, in 2024, the election is quite different. Demographically, Latinos have been shifting away from Democrats and towards Republicans across the United States, especially in a more glaring example, Texas, the Rio Grande Valley Hispanic populated pretty much shifted heavily towards the Republican Party, and Nevada is seeing a similar shift, with Trump up by 5% in the polling averages, sufficient for a likely margin. Joe Biden has not led in the polling in any single poll in the state of Nevada since the polls began to get collected and conducted since pretty much October of last year. Joe Biden currently is definitely trailing in Nevada, and right now, according to polls, by a likely margin, not the best result for the Democratic candidate. Anyways, the next state here, New Hampshire, back-to-back competitive states. A state that voted for Joe Biden by 7, unlikely to be that close in 2024, especially considering if you look at the Republican primary from the state of Michigan, which I'm going to, not Michigan, New Hampshire. I'm going to show you here that Trump got only 54% of the vote because a lot of independents preferred Nikki Haley, and they're not going to be as supportive to Donald Trump. So at the end of the day, if you look at polls, that's quite consistent. One of the few states in which Democrats are actually doing quite well in terms of in a swing state that Joe Biden's performing quite decently, that would be the state of New Hampshire, a state that is traditionally more conservative, that is now significantly shifted towards Democrats and Joe Biden. The state of New Hampshire right now, according to a polling aggregate, is closer to a likely blue state if you just look at many of these polls, though it has tightened a little bit in the more recent surveys. Now going to the next state here, the state of New Jersey. New Jersey, unsurprisingly, going to go for Biden. However, this margin is definitely alarming for the Democratic campaign there. Trump has held rallies in the state of New Jersey, fundraisers specifically, and right now the state is more competitive according to polls. Although I don't believe the state will flip, I believe the state is definitely a bit more competitive than some people may expect, though it's still probably going to go for Biden by double digits, closer to 11 or 12%, but right now the state is slightly more competitive than I think many people anticipate it to be, but again, it's not razor thin, and it's probably not going to be single digits. The polls, however, suggest that it will be single digits. Ultimately, we'll have to wait and see. Now the next state here, the state of New Mexico, traditionally a more competitive, perhaps even leaning Republican state, a state that voted for Joe Biden by double digits. It's not going to be competitive. We know Biden is going to win the state generally. That is a consensus. However, the polls do suggest the race is slightly more competitive at only about Joe Biden plus 7 in the polling aggregate. Nevertheless, that is still sufficient for a likely margin in favor of Joe Biden. Now the next state here, that will be the state of New York. New York was surprisingly competitive in 2022, and Democrats lost 4 House seats in that state. Right now, Biden is ahead in pretty much every poll conducted in New York. That being said, many of them by single digits. That's not a good piece of news for Biden because he won the state by 23% back in 2020. That shows that Biden has lost significant support in the state, which means if Biden only wins the state by 10%, he'll be losing about 1 million net votes in terms of the popular vote in the state of New York. Nevertheless, the popular vote doesn't really matter in a presidential election, but it's still alarming for the Democratic Party that a state could be competitive in perhaps 2 decades. Anyways, I still believe Biden will still win the state by closer to about 15 to 18%. Right now, however, it certainly does not look too good for Democrats in New York. New York is still in the safe margin, though albeit by a very slim safe margin right now. Actually, there is a good argument to be made according to these polls that it is in the likely margin, so I'm going to put it as the only likely Democrat. Joe Biden has retaken the Electoral College advantage, 186 to 164 for Donald Trump. Going to the next state here, the state of North Carolina, a state in which Trump won, but the only state that he did not carry the majority of the votes in out of the states that he was able to win. The state was very competitive, decided by just 70,000 votes, and with the Democratic sprawling suburbs and urban counties such as Wake County, it does seem inevitable that the state will end up voting blue someday on the presidential level. However, Trump has a significant lead in the state of North Carolina of about 6.5%, 5 times the margin Trump won the state by in 2020, and more than double the margin he won the state by in 2016. Although I might not necessarily agree that the state will vote for Trump by that large of a margin, it certainly looks extremely probable that Trump will overperform his 2020 performance in the state, and right now, according to polling at least, that is a 6.5% margin of victory for Donald Trump, putting him back on track at 180 Electoral College votes. The next state, the state of North Dakota, unsurprisingly, Trump is up by 37 in the only poll that was conducted quite a long time ago by Emerson College. Anyways, Trump has a significant lead. Going to the next state here, that would be the state of Ohio. In 2020, the state of Ohio was expected to be more competitive, a state in which earlier on the night when the first results came in, looked very, very good for Joe Biden, looked very promising for him, and then Trump just took the lead, and then he was able to win the state by close to 500,000 votes. The state is not competitive, and polls do reaffirm that assertion, with the state vote leading for Donald Trump by 9.3%. If anything, I think that Trump will do better than that 9.3% lead in the polls that is currently giving him, which is sufficient for a likely margin, putting Trump now at 200 Electoral College votes. Now, next state here, the state of Oklahoma, a state in which Trump won by about 30%, one of the states in which Trump was able to win every single county out of the state's dozens of counties, right? The only competitive county was Oklahoma County, where Oklahoma City was located. A 33% dominating victory for Donald Trump. It looks like in 2024 he'll be able to replicate that performance with about a 30% lead in the polling aggregates. And now going to the next state here, the state of Oregon. Oregon, unsurprisingly, is still leading towards the Democrats' way. However, the state is more competitive on the polling level. Nevertheless, Joe Biden still leads by an average of 12%, just sufficient for a safe characterization in the state of Oregon. Now, the next state here, the state of Pennsylvania, a absolute must-win for Joe Biden. His home state, the state that he was born in, a state that was the tipping point state in 2020. This might this time be the tipping point state in 2024, except for Donald Trump, because the state essentially it has a lot of Democratic suburbanites, essentially around Philadelphia. This is the type of the area of the state that is trending blue. These 5 counties essentially have about more than a third of the state's population, and more than a third of the state's electorate. The state is very competitive, where the rural areas are super conservative, but the blue areas around Philadelphia are trending heavily towards the Democrats' way. Ultimately, though, the state is very competitive, but I do believe right now that Trump has an edge, given the fact that the state barely went for Joe Biden, despite the fact he was leading by about 7 points in the polling aggregate from 538 in that state. Right now in Pennsylvania, though, Trump maintains a 1.4% advantage. Assuming the polls are as wrong as they were in 2020, that would show an explosive victory here for Donald Trump. However, I do believe the polls will not be as off as 2020 in terms of favoring Donald Trump, favoring Joe Biden. So right now, according to the polls, the state is right now a tilt margin for Donald Trump. Very competitive, but nevertheless a Trump lead. That's not a good showing because Trump has swept every single competitive state. The state of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have all went to Donald Trump, while the two only semi-competitive states that have went to Joe Biden are the states of Minnesota, Maine, and you can argue New Hampshire or Maine's Nebraska's second congressional district. It certainly does not look too good for Joe Biden. Now going to the state of Rhode Island here, Trump still is trailing Joe Biden by a significant margin. Not super surprising, Rhode Island gave every single county of the state to Joe Biden back in 2020. Now the next state here, the state of South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state, a state that is still significantly in favor of Donald Trump over Joe Biden. He's leading in the polling aggregate by about 13%, just like in 2020. So next state here, which would be the state of, I believe, the state of South Dakota. So in the state of South Dakota, Trump is not leading by the hugest of all margins, but he's still leading by more than 20% according to the polling aggregate, sufficient for a safe margin. Trump is now at 238 electoral college votes. He has officially overperformed his 2020 tally, but there's still a lot of states yet to be filled in, and Trump can certainly bolster this number and end up winning the presidential election at this rate. Now going to the state of Tennessee, a historically very conservative state, a state that had a Democratic governor, that won re-election by 40 points, that is Phil Bredesen, but still, it's a very reliably conservative state, a state that's going to vote for Donald Trump, and polls have Trump up by more than 20%. Now, next to the tipping point state for this race, the state of Texas. Texas has been heavily trending towards the Democratic Party. In terms of the suburban areas, you can watch the shifts here. For example, Dallas County, a 6% shift towards Joe Biden and the Democrats. Tarrant County, a 9% shift. Denton County, a 12% shift. Collins County, 12% shift. Right, we go to the big Democratic areas. Williamson County, 11% shift. Right, San Antonio County. Where's that? Travis, 6.5% shift. Where's San Antonio? I kind of forgot. Right, San Antonio, about a 5% shift towards Biden. We saw his significant shifts towards Joe Biden, but if you look at the Rio Grande Valley, you look at the rural areas, those are type of areas that shifted towards Donald Trump. All being even, Trump still won the state by a likely margin, which is just under a 6% margin. In 2024, considering how the popular vote's looking, Trump is expected to win the state by both polls and general pundit expectations by a larger margin. Trump is leading right now by 11.1%, a pretty healthy lead over Joe Biden, a better performance than both 2020 and 2016 for Donald Trump. And with the state of Texas now in the Trump column, Trump has officially won the presidency according to this electoral college map, right now with 289 electoral votes, while Joe Biden trailing at 198 electoral college votes. Currently still has some states to build up that lead, and next state is the state of Utah. The state of Utah has been less friendly to Donald Trump, with some of the polls suggesting that Trump is actually within single digits of Joe Biden. However, the most recent polls have Trump up by 24 and 28% respectively, so we're going to have the state of Utah right now still in the safe Republican column, though it is a state that is very urban, and it is a state in which is more college educated, which suggests the state might be trending towards the Democratic Party in the next 2 decades or so. The next state here, the state of Vermont, obviously going to go for Joe Biden, though Biden is only up 5 points against Kennedy. I'm not sure why. Anyways, the state of Vermont, I'm not going to buy that poll. Safe for Joe Biden. The next state here, the state of Virginia. Virginia is actually very tight in terms of the polling aggregate. Joe Biden's leading by just 1 to 3% in the most recent polls. But again, some of them were sponsored by Donald Trump and Fox News, which are more conservative pundits. But this College Institute for Policy and Opinion Research, it shouldn't be super biased against Democrats. And the two polls they produce have Biden up by 2 and even. So the race is still certainly very competitive. Nevertheless, here, the state is just too far gone for Republicans at this point. It was a state that Joe Biden won by more than 400,000 votes, a state that Biden really won solidly. And the fact is, there are a lot of Democratic cities around the state of Virginia, and we see in Fairfax County, Democrats had such a big lead in that area, in which really Democrats have no shot of actually losing the state. But the fact that this race is so competitive does signify trouble for the Democratic Party. Of course, Republicans are not going to win Virginia, but still, it's a very concerning sign and troubling sign for Joe Biden. Right now, according to the recent polling aggregate, the state is just tilt for Joe Biden, a very narrow margin. Now, going to state Washington, there was one shocking poll that had Joe Biden down 5 points against Donald Trump, and another that had Trump up by 1. And the more recent polls does have right now Democrats up by a much larger margin. And something along the lines of Biden plus 16 is much closer to the general reality than a poll that has Trump up by 5%. Joe Biden's going to win the state. Joe Biden's was up by 20% in the state of Washington back in 2020. Nevertheless, the fact that the margins are much tighter this time around, although Trump is not going to win the state by 5, the fact that the state could be within single digits is still striking should be striking to Joe Biden, the fact that he's underperforming this much in such a blue state. However, that could be attributed to the progressive movement in the state and really isn't a great indication. Right now, the polling average does have Joe Biden up by just a likely margin, not the best sign for Joe Biden. Anyways, here, just with 3 states remaining, West Virginia, we're going to get cleared out of the way. Trump is going to win West Virginia by more than 30%. He won the state back in 2020 by almost 40%, and he won every single county in the state, similarly to the state of Oklahoma. Anyways, the state will go for Donald Trump for sure by a safe margin. Now the next state here, the state of Wisconsin, the final competitive state, a state that Joe Biden won by just 0.7%. Trump won the state by 0.7 back in 2016, a similar margin as similar vote total. The state really shifted towards Joe Biden because of the fact that the wild counties saw Democrats hugely overperforming, as well as Milwaukee County and Dane County, essentially the more Democratic areas of the state, as well as the wild counties, which are kind of exurban the areas that are trending blue. However, Trump did very well in the rural areas, overperformed his 2016 numbers in Ron Kind's district, which is over here, more working class. And the state could definitely vote for Donald Trump because of the fact that Joe Biden only won the state by less than a point. And the fact is, again, Biden's approval rating is very low. The economics, certainly for the United States right now, doesn't look good. The statistics look quite good, but again, the voters, they can't feel that positivity. And the fact is, food prices and all that are increasing. And it's not hard for Trump to gain 20,000 votes in a state that he won by less. He won in 2016. And if you look at the polls, that is certainly the sentiment from the state of Wisconsin. Trump does lead by 0.8%, which is a very narrow margin considering, again, that does seemingly mirror his 2016 margin in the state of Wisconsin, in which he won the state by 0.7, Joe Biden won the state by 0.6, and now Trump is leading by 0.8%. Though again, we see a fluctuation of polls that suggests either Biden is up or Trump is up. There's quite a few polls that have the state as even, and right now the state is certainly very competitive. Who will win the state, I'm certainly not very sure right now, but I do believe at this point that Trump will probably carry the state of Wisconsin because he is also favored in Michigan and Pennsylvania, in my opinion. He's probably, out of these 3 states, if Trump were to win one of them, it's probably the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin right now, I would agree with this tilt Republican characterization. We're going to finish off here with the most conservative state in the union, the state of Wyoming, a state that is expected to vote for Trump by 53%, according to one poll conducted by Emerson College. So that wraps it up with Joe Biden at 226 electoral votes, Trump at 312 electoral votes. What can I get from this map? Well, this actually does reflect my most recent prediction, with Trump at 312 and Joe Biden at 226 electoral college votes. But I think that a lot of the margins could be more competitive. I think Nevada will be a lean margin. I think Arizona and Georgia could perhaps both be tilt for Donald Trump and not lean or likely, especially not likely. I think Virginia will be likely for Joe Biden. I think Biden will do a bit better, and I do believe that Biden will win the popular vote, contrary to what is predicted according to the polls right now on the national level. But I do believe that Joe Biden right now is certainly going to lose to Donald Trump if the election was held today. I think Trump has about an 85% chance of winning. By November, I think that chance dips to about 75% or 70%. But nevertheless, I do believe Trump is favored to win the election, regardless if it's held today or if it's held in November. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. This video took a very long time to make, and like 90-something% of you are not subscribed, so make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.